So thank you to CTP Cryogenics in SoCal. We actually deep cryo treated and WPC treated majority of the components in this trans. Not every single component. Some parts we only cryo treated. Majority got both the WPC and cryo. But yeah, let's talk about what we decided to treat, what we decided not to treat, and some of the reasons behind these decisions. So this time we did majority of the transmission. So like forks, gears, shafts, bearings. Some interesting things I learned this time. So the input bearing on a T50 probably has the hardest job in that trans. So accordingly, these guys wear out pretty quickly. Just for example, if you have a whirring noise in neutral that goes away with clutch in, it's probably not your throwout bearing in your Corolla. It's actually the input bearing in the T50 trans. So I wanted the entire input bearing to be WPC and cryo treated. Ends up, so I got these cryoed, but I was told that these type of bearings, they typically do not want to WPC because they're afraid of, you know, the shop material for WPC to get trapped inside these bearing races. So instead, luckily this bearing has a removable inner race. So instead, they were able to WPC the just the inner race. And I don't know if you guys can tell, this thing's like super slick. And these are dry too, so. So a lot of these items are new. Some we reused because they were still good to reuse, or, you know, in some cases long discontinued. These cage needle bearings for first and second gear, they were actually able to WPC and cryo these guys. You can tell because WPC leaves that signature matte gray or silver finish. So all three of the shift forks are brand new Toyota units. Again, WPC, cryo. The biggest thing with these guys is that these pads wear against the shift sleeves, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this should be first, second, shift sleeve, and fork. These guys go like that, and you can see how the pads will wear. And majority of the time, the sleeve is actually a harder material than the fork is. So it's actually the pads on the fork that'll wear. And when these wear out, this can give you problems like a sloppy shift, popping out of gear, a bunch of problems you don't want. So this WPC along with the cryo treatment will help significantly in reducing the amount of wear these guys experience. So even brand new TRD gear set, I go through every single gear and carefully inspect them. Make sure, is there any damage, any burrs, any like foreign object that's stuck in there. Even a brand new gear set may need some deburring. So in this instance, these oil channels, right in there, you may be able to see it. Just to chamfer that edge and allow oil to better flow through, similar to a velocity stack. Air or water wants to flow easier over a rounded surface rather than a flat, like a 90-degree surface. Same thing, we have some oil channels on the back. Chamfered all four of these guys too. So really important for third gear. So this is actually the original output shaft. Again, WPC and completely cryoed. What I really only needed treated on this guy was actually this section right here where third gear rides on. So in some transmissions, like for S chassis and for the T50, third gear does not have an inner bearing. It rides directly on the shaft. And you would not be able to do that in an untreated shaft or gear. And so pretty common, I'll see these third gears turn like a really dark color because the gear oil's burnt up from these guys overheating. And again, if this guy has a hard time spinning freely, that's only gonna mean it's gonna be harder to get into third gear or, you know, even downshift, especially downshift from, you know, the 3-4. So what's another part of helping third gear spin smoothly or freely? These oil channels commonly, I think it's called extruded. So these channels, I believe from the factory, get extruded out. And what does that mean? Is that there can be little burrs between these oil channels and out on these edges. And so before I had this treated, I actually looked through and deburred every little imperfection that I saw inside these oil channels. And again, that's to help third gear spin smoother and, you know, have a smoother shift for that transmission. Some of you guys might think this is kind of crazy, but also the cases got deburred in this too. So what am I talking about? So if you check this out, that hole, this hole, and this hole, all the casting flash got removed and also deburred and smoothed all these surfaces out. Just as a reminder, that casting flash is a liability because not only can it break off and get into the rest of the trans, but in some cases that can propagate a crack in forming. Same thing, some of these surfaces, gear oil flows better, again, at a rounded surface rather than a 90-degree or a bunch of like jagged edge casting flash that was originally in here. Small side effect, maybe negligible, but depending how much deburr work, you may actually add a little bit of fluid capacity to the trans. I'm not going to do it to this one, but I've gone crazy before on previous builds where I've actually polished out the case and had you know, pretty much like 1,000 grit finish inside the cases and completely deburred the inside, but we're not going to go that crazy with this one. So going down my list, let's talk about some of the things we, you know, did both WPC and Cryo, or did Cryo only. So let's start with Cryo only. So brand new Toyota Syncros, we cryo treated these only. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I've used US made aftermarket Syncros, and I've honestly found no performance difference between the US and the factory Toyota Syncros. Although I will say the Toyota Syncros look far better constructed in like the tooth shape and, you know, the lack of casting flash in the shift sleeves. So these are the guys that select what gear you want to go in. So here's 5 reverse, 3 4, 1 2. If you notice, these guys aren't WPC treated, and why is that? So, you know, shout out to my buddy Verus in SoCal. Had problems with a rebuilt T50, and I am glad I walked him through that because I learned a lot from that. So, long story short, he had his shift sleeves WPC treated, and he had at least a third gear pop out. And long story short, putting non-treated sleeves and shimming the third gear shift detent fixed his third gear pop out. We got to unpack that, right? That's a lot. So I've heard of WPC treating the shift sleeves, and I've seen a lot of articles on it. I was not going to take that risk with this customer trans, so I will go based on, you know, some reputable experience in this case. So I only had the sleeves cryo treated. If I could take a guess, the sleeves may need a little bit of like tooth or friction to stay. Let's grab some gears to stay engaged, right? May need a certain amount of like tooth or friction, but again, that's just an educated guess. So shimming the third gear shift spring detent, let's talk about that. So I don't have the rods in here, but 3 rods go in there for the shift forks, and basically when you select gear out here, the forks move like that to select gears. We have holes for 3 detent springs and detent balls that basically, when you shift into gear, there's a cutout in the fork and the ball locks in there. We'll just use this as an example. Let's say we shift into gear and then a ball would sit in there and keep this locked in there. So off the top of my head, I need to see which one's third, but basically M4 washer. So when we put the spring in there, we're going to set the washer on top and then put the retaining plate on top to shim that spring and put a little bit more pressure on that recess in the third gear fork. So this knowledge actually came from the guy who built Verus's trans. Apparently he was a Toyota dealer tech, you know, back when the AE86 wasn't that old. And apparently they'd see AE86s with, you know, unmodified with a third gear pop out. And this is how they fixed that third gear pop out, was to shim that spring. So, you know, pro tip, 0.5 millimeter to 0.7 millimeter thickness is what they want. And according to that Toyota tech, 1 mil would cause it to be too hard to shift into third gear. So I have this M4 washer from the hardware store that's 0.5 mil thickness, and we're going to shim this spring just ahead of time. This should also give third gear a little bit of more positive feel. In my personal trans, I know at the track, I've had a short shifter that on decel and only at the track, you could see the shifter pop back and it would pop out a third. And again, I could never duplicate this anywhere else. It was only on the road course that under decel, it would pop out a third, and only using a short shifter. And just changing to a regular OEM shifter, I didn't have that third gear pop out anymore. So if I would have known that years ago, I might have tried to shim that spring. So worth it for you guys to try also. Yeah, I know there's a bunch of factors behind the gear pop out, like what did they replace, you know, the quality of the build. I'm sure there's many factors, but I really didn't want to have this customer be the guinea pig and see if, you know, treated sleeves would pop out or not, right? So again, keeping within budget for the customer, I chose, you know, only the critical items that I thought should be treated. So fourth input looks like third, second, and that should be first gear with the pairing countershaft gears to match, all WPC and Cryo treated. This is actually the original input shaft to this trans, and again, before sending this out, cleaned, deburred. On a factory input shaft, there's usually a ton of casting flash that sticks up right here. If the dog teeth have any like weird wear or extra burrs, the burrs usually show up right here. And then same thing as the shift sleeve slides on this guy, you can run your fingernail through the tops of these dog teeth and you'll feel the burrs up here too. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Even the inside of this guy where you load up the needle bearings, all this got WPC treated. Another interesting thing with this trans, the counter shaft, you can separate the gears off the counter shaft. As you can see here, normally only fifth gear comes off the counter shaft. All this is one piece. And you know, in my experience, what does that mean? So I see a lot of input shaft failures. And so that means when fourth gear on the output shaft, or when you get a input shaft failure, fourth gear teeth, that usually means fourth on the counter shaft gets worn or destroyed also, which means an input shaft failure means the whole counter shaft's got to get thrown away. This is cool because then you can change individual gears. Maybe you can like mix and match and change ratios. The tough part about this is there's no real documentation on anyone assembling these, so I am pretty much on my own. It's funny, like I told my assistant to go, you know, dig online to see if anyone has instructions, and he came back really sad, like I couldn't find anything, and I kind of laughed. I was like, yeah, I don't doubt it, because this is the era of Corolla where no one wanted to give up their secrets. Also pretty cool. These were in a TRD labeled baggie. These are the circlips, or the C-clips for these guys. And then to separate out the gears, there's these spacers that go, you know, in between. Yeah, just some other cool insider tricks that I have while we have this transmission out here. There's 3 shift rods. Every single one of these rods gets polished down. And I mean, really quickly, why? The smoother this shift rod can slide in and out of the case, the smoother your shift's gonna be. And part of an example of that, a lot of modern transmissions, including, you know, some you've probably seen on this channel, TL70, J160, late W58, have either a brass insert or ball bearings inside where the shift rods go. Again, because the smoother this shift rod goes in and out, the smoother that, you know, the driver feels that shift. So yeah, I'll get this together. Hopefully I'll be able to shoot another video with everybody, both shafts assembled inside the cases, and we'll do like a bench test as normal. Thank you guys again for watching. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. I really appreciate the support. If you're interested in having a transmission rebuilt, you can visit cmautohaus.com, look at the services page for pricing, and then proceed to have a heart attack. But yeah, thank you guys again, and I'll catch you guys at the next video.